conducting virtual or other alternative graduation plans, and that was due in no small part to the guidance we received from this task force. So I want to thank you for that over the last few weeks as we have continued to go through this unprecedented time. However, we do need to move into the next phase, and we need to start talking about and giving guidance to districts about what next year looks like. How do we restart? That is a conversation that is going on nationally, of course, and I'm sure all of you are involved with your other national partner organizations and are hearing various ideas and methods for restarting school. And then, of course, between now and the restart, we need to ensure that we're continuing to guide districts as they continue to provide summer feeding options, and we hope that they have the bandwidth and the ability to provide some types of enrichment and accelerated learning opportunities over the summer. But we also know that's a heavy lift and an ask for them because we know there are budget considerations in many school districts, and there's also just an exhaustion level, of course, that we're dealing with everybody pretty much burned out from what we're hearing across the state, and trying to deliver instruction and deliver services in a new way has been very taxing on everyone. However, we want to make sure we utilize what efforts and resources we have to assist students over the summer. So that's part of the discussion today. And of course, the CARES funding, which will be a huge help to Kentucky. That application for the official application for those funds, we submitted that over the weekend. And then for the large pot of money, you'll be hearing more about that from Robin. And of course, the governor's portion, governor's fund, which is a smaller fund, that will be forthcoming as well. And then also, of course, we're going to talk about reentry and what all those options may look like. We anticipate giving guidance to districts in the next few days, not telling them what to do, but making sure they know that there are several scenarios that they're going to have to be prepared to handle as they reenter school. Because even if we were to enter school in a normal way with full school bus loads and a 400 capacity building with 400 people in it, we know that there's likely to be interruptions due to the virus as the semester goes on, and may require alternative type instruction, or we may have to begin the summer that way. So we want to make sure we're prepared for that, and we'll be seeking your advice. And then finally, mental health issues. We want to make sure that we continue to address the needs of students now, but we also know that there will be lingering aspects from this. An odd way of closing the year out. Students will be bringing that with them next year. And so we have Dr. Sweeney to lead us through that. So it's a pretty heavy agenda. We have some guiding questions there to help guide the discussion, and we want and need your feedback. So Karen, or I guess we'll just move right into the CARES funding discussion with Robin Kinney.
Yes, and I will go ahead and share what we'll be looking at. All right, can you all see my screen?
Not yet, Karen. Okay, there it is. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Robin Kinney. I'm the Associate Commissioner in the Office of Finance and Operations. It's a pleasure to be here with you online this afternoon. We're going to talk a little bit about the CARES Act, and really our guiding question for today's presentation that we'll ask you to think about as we're going through the materials and to provide context for a little discussion at the end is, how can Kentucky Educational Partners assist school districts in pandemic recovery efforts as they receive CARES Act funding? Kevin kicked us off and talked to us about we really are moving into a phase 2 type of phase for the coronavirus pandemic, and we've kind of going into a place now where we've heard a little bit about the CARES Act and the things that we need to do to access those funds, and now we'll be turning to once those funds are received, really how can we support local school districts and the children of the Commonwealth of Kentucky on once those funds are here. Next slide, please, Karen. Karen, are you still with us?
Yeah, sorry, I just have a bad connection, so it just
Okay,
takes a little bit longer.
that's all right.
Did it change?
There it goes. Okay. I can tell just by looking at the attendees for today's presentation that many of you probably are following the CARES Act pretty closely because you all come from backgrounds of an educational interest and you've probably received some of this information already. But just so that we can start with a little background, of course, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act, was passed on March 27th. It is a $2.2 trillion in emergency funding for the United States. And about 30.75 billion of that is for emergency education funding to the states. Kentucky's share is listed there on the screen, 1.73 billion in CARES Act funds. And really the two pots of money that we're going to focus on for today's discussion, which really do carry the most interest for local school districts, are the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, which, as we all have to have an acronym, are quickly becoming known as the GEAR Fund, of about 44 million coming to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And the secondary pot, Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief, or ESSER Fund, of about 194 million. And for both of these pots of money, I will share with you that KDE from the beginning began working on guidance documents for local school districts. And we're actually going to have two separate guidance documents to make sure that we can adequately cover each of the pots of money. Some of them do have a little bit of a distinction. We are working with USED, who is continuously providing information on these funds. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate the ongoing support of CCSSO, which is the Council on Chief State School Officers. We are in very frequent communications with them. They provide webinars or webcasts for us every single week as we learn more about the pots of money and how they can be used for. So that kind of is what we're going to focus on today, just focus on these two pots of money. Next slide, please. Karen.
Sorry, I had my headset up. It's getting there.
Okay.
I hope.
We might be in slow motion today.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. You still can't see it?
Still can't see it. There we go. Okay. Let's focus first on the Governor's Emergency Education Relief, or the GEAR Fund, Kentucky allocation, almost 44 million. And we received notice of the fund application on April 14th. The Lieutenant Governor, and as Lieutenant Governor Coleman, Secretary also of the Education and Workforce Cabinet, reached out to us early on, and we talked with the cabinet staff representing the governor, talking about what would be a really good use of the GEARS Fund money. And quickly, we saw as emerging issues for really all local school districts these issues of remote learning under our non-traditional instruction and technology overall. You know, I think we were very well poised as far as having the ways to quickly go to non-traditional instruction. And we are learning every single day. School districts are learning every single day of ways to make that better. And we want to continue to improve remote learning on behalf of local school districts and students, and the technology that is needed to support that. So one area for the GEARS Fund money would be that remote learning technology aspect. The other thing that we saw quickly emerging was this continuation and support by local school districts, which has really been nothing short of remarkable in continuing to provide food services for children. And so we quickly saw that as another emerging need that may have long-term implications. For the GEARS Fund money, the governor does have 1 year from receipt of the funds to make awards, and the governor can award those funds in 3 areas: emergency support to LEAs, the SEA deems most significantly impacted. And I will stop there for just a minute to say, while we can appreciate this way to award funds for many states, in Kentucky, we really have found that all of our local school districts have been impacted by the coronavirus almost to in the same ways, although maybe to differing degrees. So our application itself really is seeking the use of the GEARS fund money to all local school districts. In other states, if we took maybe New York, for example, in New York City, it's clear that we see from the national media that New York City and New York State has been really significantly impacted. But Kentucky, we've decided to take an approach that all of our school districts have been impacted, and we would like to distribute our funds really to all school districts. The governor could also have award funds to institutes of higher education, that's IHEs, that are significantly impacted by the coronavirus, and support to any other IHE, LEA, or educational related entity within the state that the governor deems essential for carrying out those purposes. Next slide, please. I will share while we're waiting for the next slide that the governor's office and the Council on Post-Secondary Education, the Lieutenant Governor, I should say, the Council on Post-Secondary Education and KDE have worked very closely in trying to identify ways that we can partner together on the use of the GEAR funds. From that amount, Governor Beshear is allocating out of the $44 million, $30 million of the GEAR funds to support elementary and secondary education. The remaining portion will go to the institutes of higher education. As the second bullet suggests, we are deeming all Kentucky schools significantly impacted by the coronavirus, and our application was packaged that way. The GEAR funds can be used as set forth in our application and our request to support remote learning, technology, and school district food service. We really want to try to make this as easy as possible for school districts to access the funds. So just a little bit about that process. We are going to be asking superintendents to sign an assurance document. And instead of having local school boards to have to approve that, and in the order to get the funds to local school districts as quickly as possible, we're not going to require that local board action. But of course, school districts should continue to comply with all their regular notices to their school boards and having their school boards involved in those discussions once the funds are received. The funds may be used for eligible expenses occurring on or after March 13th of 2020. That was the declaration of the national emergency. And so we've had some districts that have expended dollars before they will actually receive funding that they could actually be reimbursed for. But those expenditures need to have occurred from March 13th forward. GEAR funds are available for obligation by the receiving entity through September 30th, 2020. So it's important that really as a discussion about all CARES funding, that districts are thinking about both short-term needs and long-term needs as they consider options for the use of these funds. Next slide, please.
I can go the slides and hoping that works better.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble getting it to advance from the slideshow view. Let's see.
Yeah, I think I've had issues with that before, which is why I wasn't putting it in slideshow. You may have to take it out of slideshow.
Okay, sorry.
So I think if nothing else, we've learned to try to be flexible as we are trying to impart information and trying to learn about the things. This is one example of how we can get better as we're receiving CARES funding, any type of remote learning and trying to iron out those challenges that kind of come up along the way.
Karen, you're going to have to take back control to do it. It won't exit this. So my apologies, everyone.
Thank you, Melody.
Okay. All right, are you on the ESSER fund slide
Yes.
now? Okay, that's what I have up.
Okay, now I see it. I hope everybody else can see it. The next pot of money is ESSER funds. That is the larger pot of money. Kentucky's grant is about 194 million, 193 plus million. The ESSER funds require that at least 90% of the amount provided to Kentucky will go to local school districts. It will be distributed through the Title 1A formula, and I think we've had a little bit of confusion at the beginning, but I think we've gotten it clarified that even though the funds are distributed through the Title I formula, it does not mean that the Title Fund, that the uses of these new CARES Fund money must follow the same constraints as Title I. There's great discretion and flexibility on behalf of local school districts on how they can use this. And we'll get to those slides, the uses a little bit later in the presentation. It is anticipated that districts will receive about 83% of what they received in fiscal year 2019 Title 1A funds. And so we use that with local school districts as we begin talking about the CARES Act so that they could begin their planning, to give them a ballpark of about how much they will receive from the CARES Act. It is above and beyond Title I, so they'll get their regular Title I allocation, and then this will be above and on top of that. They can be expended much more broadly, and we received notice of the funds and application on April 23rd, and as Commissioner Brown said at the beginning of the presentation, we did file our application over the weekend for receipt of EARS funds money. We do think that there will be a quick turnaround. I think that USAID's goal was within 3 business days, we should receive action upon our application is filed. Next slide, please. Okay. The next 2 slides really talk about permissible uses of ESSER funds. It starts out with any activity authorized by ESEA, IDEA, Perkins, McKinney-Vento, the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, very, very broad purposes. And then there's sort of this catch-all of all kinds of other activities that are popping up as a result of the coronavirus itself. So any kind of preparedness and response efforts, helping our principals and school leaders with individual school needs, activities to address the unique needs of subpopulations, low-income children, children with disabilities, English language learners, racial and ethnic minorities, all of those, homeless, foster care, lots, very, very broad, probably unprecedented discretion and flexibility on the use of these funds that you typically don't see when federal funds are coming to an agency. Procedures and systems to improve preparedness and training and professional development for staff. Really, really broad, expansive uses permitted by these funds. And that's really important. We will see local school districts that have varied needs, things that they need funding in one area more than the other. And again, remember that at this point in time is the regular funding for these programs will also be forthcoming. So this is above and beyond what they're typically receiving. Next slide, please.
It's coming.
Okay. I'll go ahead and talk. A lot of the other things that, and these are all just examples for thinking. Purchasing supplies to sanitize and clean facilities. We know that as we're in phase two and talking about reentry into building, if they need heightened cleaning, disinfecting, we do envision there will be a much more frequency of that. So they're going to need funds to help with that. Planning, anything that in a non-traditional instruction, whether we're still providing meals, technology for online learning, all of those types of purchasing of educational technology, that includes hardware, software, and connectivity. We don't want to forget about mental health services, needs, and supports. And I'm not going to go through the rest of these, but as you can see, the very, very broad and flexible uses of the funds. Next slide, please. I do also want to share that we've had some questions about salaries. I would say overall for both pots of funds, there really is an encouragement for local school districts to continue to pay the salaries of their staff. And I guess with any federal funds that come, especially funds that are a relief fund nature, you really don't want to spend these to add new long-term staff, because at some point, of course, federal funds of this type go away. So while you may need to bring on some additional help to, for example, if you had some technology that you needed to get prepared for rollout, you needed to get it ready to go out the door to students, you may have a need to supplement and have some staff that can help with that. But really, long-term staffing of a permanent nature is not encouraged with the use of CARES Fund. I do want to point out that for both pots of funds, equitable services still applies. And we have received some very recent additional direction and guidance from US Ed. So I guess the most important thing, the controls of the CARES Act funds and the items purchased with the funds must remain in public control. So that needs to remain with the local school district. But under Title I and in the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support, and we'll be helping local school districts as they work through the guidance under equitable services that still needs to be provided. For any non-public schools, those are ones that are accredited, and they also have to have been in existence already. So if you have brand new schools that are trying to be set up, they would not be eligible for any access to services under the equitable services provisions. I'm going to stop for just a minute. I've kind of flown through these slides fairly quickly, but I think what we'd like to hear now is we've had some questions from our educational partners, many that are online with us here today. And I think the question has been, how can we help? And let me start with maybe a couple of sentences, and then we'd like to hear some of your thoughts. Under both the GEARS and ESSER funds will be distributed to local educational agencies. So that will be our local school districts. There will be some funds that are withheld at the state level for ESSER. And we very much appreciate the willingness and the interest of all of our educational partners to help us. So as we think about opportunities that would be good from a statewide perspective, we are very much interested in hearing thoughts about how your entities and agencies can help. We at the department have lost a lot of staffing over the years, and we are very lean, like many of you are. And I think it's going to take partnerships to really be able to effectuate what is needed at the local school districts. So even though the funds are going to LEAs and some of those funds being withheld at the state level, we do have interest in partnerships and we do have interest in, and we'll provide guidance to local school districts to encourage them to think about partnerships with our educational partners that would yield the most return. Capacity is lean at the state and at the local school districts, and so I would appreciate, as you're thinking about the uses of the funds, how your particular agency or could help local school districts and the Kentucky Department of Education to effectuate our goals. So I'm going to stop for just a minute and see if anyone has any questions or to invite discussion on that topic.
Robin?
Yes.
Robin, can you hear me? This is Nancy Hutchinson to the group.
Hi, Nancy.
I was one of them that asked about that as the director of KEDC, and I know we've got our other service agency partners on here, our educational cooperatives, and I know many times it's been a shout out that, you know, we're here to help them and we will do everything we can, as we always do. But we're also very limited in resources to be able to help to this magnitude. So that's why I put that out there, because the co-ops are pretty lean, some more than others, and it's going to be tough on everyone, especially with our revenue going down so much in the last few months. So I just wanted to put that out there about if there would be any funding for us to be able to use to do this work. Thank you.
Nancy, I think that that's a good point. I think we're all kind of lean. I think the dollars will be dispersed to local school districts and also to the Commonwealth. However, I could envision partnerships of a contractual nature if your cooperatives or other educational partners can assist in some of these efforts. I think we'll just need to coordinate our efforts to make sure that we're doing it in the most efficient and wisest way possible. But I think it's going to take all of us around the table to make that happen. So I think there will be some dollars there. It's just coordinating those efforts and making sure that we're thinking through the best partnerships for us to avail ourselves of. So I'm very encouraged that, and have seen the cooperatives, educational cooperatives, and other agencies, our educational partners, have that level of interest and appreciate that they're willing to continue to step up to the plate. But I think what I'm hearing from you is you'll need some financial help to do that. And so I think it's just coordinating those efforts for the best uses.
Thank you, Robin.
Okay, pardon me, toward the end of the meeting, we're going to have an exit slip, and all of these guiding questions are going to be on that. And so you will have an opportunity to write in any feedback that you have for us. I'll be posting that a little bit later in the discussion. So right now, let's go ahead and move on to summer learning. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Amanda Ellis. Yeah.
Karen, before we do that, one thing I would like to state about one of the things that I have kind of worried about with the CARES funding, and this, I don't know that there's nothing to do about this now, but and this is, you know, all because the funding is coming after a lot of, even though you can look back to March 13th, you know, we're just now learning from the federal guidance really what it all can be used for. And so I can envision a scenario of where, for example, Jefferson County spent money on 20,000 or so Chromebooks for its students, and Jefferson County has the cash flow to do that. And Jefferson County will be able to take advantage of CARES Act funding to recoup some of those costs, I'm sure. And they may or may not choose to use it for that. But there are other districts that probably would have purchased Chromebooks had they known there was going to be a reimbursement coming forward later on from the federal government, which was impossible to know them, but they didn't have the cash flow like some other districts did to buy the Chromebooks to do remote learning. So again, it's an equity issue, and that same equity analysis exists all over the state in various different scenarios. But that's one thing that is unfortunate, and there's no way to change how all that happened. Just it's a timing issue and a result of various different levels of finances in our districts. But I just wanted to point that out, that the use of those funds it's going to vary district to district, just because some districts spent money early on, some districts didn't, some districts are spending it now, some districts may spend it more now that they know what they're getting. It's going to be everything in between.
Mary asked for a copy of the PowerPoint. Yes, I think it's been updated a little bit since I sent out the invite, so I'll make sure that gets out to all of you. It'll be posted on our website. I'll send a link so that you'll have all the materials in their most up-to-date form. Okay, I think we're now ready to move on to summer learning with Amanda Ellis and Kelly Foster.
Okay, well, I'll get us started, and then we will jump into the guiding question to get your feedback. As we get into the summer, and as you all know, as Kevin has mentioned already, there's a lot of fatigue, a lot of weariness, and a lot of questions about how to even start preparing for the fall. But we can't allow ourselves to overlook the summer. There's always a concern with summertime, with students having summer slide and being engaged and having their basic needs met. And I know that so many of our districts are still preparing meals and having plans for that. So some of the things that we're doing specific to summer is, if some of you may recall, is that last summer we paired up with our summer feeding programs and piloted the Read Up program, which was just really encouraging literacy, especially for our younger children and families who typically come to the feeding sites. I know that has changed drastically since a year, but we do have 19 districts who've signed on for that, or 19 feeding sites, and we will be continuing that. But in that, the Children's Literacy Foundation has agreed to allow us to share that information that we typically give families. And so we're going to have a summer support website. So it's one place. We'll have it linked to the COVID-19, so it's easy access for you all to find. And we will have resources not just on literacy, but also mathematics, games that can be played. We've talked with KET, and Tanya has done a great job of getting back to me. And I got her email last week and haven't had a chance to get back to her, but they're planning around summer. So we definitely will have links to KET and what they're planning to do. Also, James Allen is our media specialist coordinator, and we're going to be having website or easy links for local libraries. Many of our local libraries, as you all know, won't be open, and many of our families really rely on the library in the summer for either it's their feeding site or air conditioning or connectivity. And so just putting out there what the local libraries are doing and what library and archives are promoting for the summer. We're also going to be doing some guest readers and putting that on the web. I was reminded today, which I was really glad that I was, by my former media specialist, to double check all of the books that we're going to be reading for copyright to ensure that we follow all the laws. And so before we record the first one, we will make sure that all of our books are appropriate and are allowed to be recorded and shared online. But it's really just to promote reading and mathematics, numeracy. When the resources come along with middle and high school, it's a little more difficult, but I know that some of our districts are reaching out, continuing that support, and trying to catch some kids up or to finish up. For our younger students, many of our districts are looking at how to foster the learning in the home, or to continue some type of connection throughout the summer and really put their efforts towards their neediest population of students who may not have received what they needed online, and thinking forward on that. So I'll pause with that. And Kelly, did you have anything else to add before we get their feedback?
Good afternoon. The only thing that I would really add to everything that Amanda said is I just want the group to be aware that we are partnering with several national organizations, CCSSO, AIR, SREB, and trying to provide information and guidance to the districts about opening up for summer programs, what those would look like, virtual or in person, as well as the re-entry to the school year. So when we open up the guided question, we really want to hear your feedback because you're also talking with districts, and what questions, concerns, and barriers are you hearing from them that can help us prepare that guidance? Thank you.
We definitely want to give you some time to think and type. And as you see in the chat box, Tanya Crum said, we're ready when you are. And they really are. They've been great to talk with. I had about an hour conversation with them. Sorry, my screen is so dark. An hour conversation with them last week, just brainstorming what's been used. They've done a good job of starting to dig into their data about the numbers that have gone up on usage, what shows are being watched, since you know they've adjusted their entire programming to really provide service for families in Kentucky and for our students as they go through the remote learning period, and really be an advocate for families. And I appreciate that greatly. We want to definitely continue that support as appropriate. So that's something to consider. And the other thing that we've been asked about, I don't know if Kelly's folks have, but in speaking what Kelly had said about the guidances come out, and even with what came out last week about how to have folks in your building to close things out, there are very clear public health guidance and rules that we're supposed to be following to fulfill or really to maintain safety and to prevent any spread of COVID-19. You know, assume the same and work with your public health departments definitely on anything you're thinking about as you consider how you will work directly, if you're considering that, working directly with students. Really consult with your public health officials to ensure that you're following appropriate protocol and keeping everyone safe. We know there's a lot of ideas and there's a lot of anxious feelings about having students that they know who have been in maybe chaotic homes or have had no connection or very little connection, no work being completed or even contact much with the students. I know some districts have called me directly to ask how they can reach those students and work with them in the summer. But we would always advise you to work with your public health officials and ensure to follow the recommendations and guidelines to keep everyone safe. Karen has posted just what are the biggest barriers preventing the provision of meaningful summer learning for students. Please feel free to share. I won't belabor on the point, but we really do appreciate your feedback. We'll be collecting feedback also from our advisories to build up the website and any of the resources that we need to provide to help with considerations as districts make decisions as they transition into the summer months. So I think that's what we have right now. And Karen or whomever, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Amanda. I see that David Johnson has typed something in. Districts are projecting many of the same barriers that they currently face: access to all students, technology, face-to-face, et cetera, social distancing, identifying students and their gaps, et cetera. Okay.
Also,
we'll go ahead.
I don't think we can underestimate the exhaustion and the burnout that exists both on the part of teachers and students. You know, it'd be one thing if we were coming off a traditional school year and a district was launching a online or a remote using an NTI type delivery model for the summer. And the novelty of that might be attractive to everyone involved, but I think there's a lot of just exhaustion out there, and I think that might continue to be a barrier over the summer to have come off 6 weeks in most places of non-traditional instruction, a lot of that virtually or using packets, and then to go into another phase over the summer, using similar delivery methods. It's the right thing to do to continue doing that, but I just think it's going to be an uphill battle for districts that are trying to implement that. And please, folks, speak up if you think that that's not an accurate assessment of it.
And just to add to Kevin's comments, Kevin, I couldn't agree more. A lot of our resources you will see is really geared towards family. It's very family friendly. And the reason we pair up with the summer feeding is because it is a non-traditional setup as far as it's not school. It's very welcoming. And we have an opportunity, well, typically we would have the opportunity to allow students to pick out books and to really just on a real low key engage families in just the literacy activities and math games and things that we have. So really our audience that we're gearing our resources for are really towards the families for something to do and a really positive way to do it. Because to your point, Kevin, there is a huge amount of fatigue and stress on the families, especially with those who may not be employed or getting ready to go back to work with maybe not having childcare. There's a lot going on in our families right now. And so I appreciate you making that point, and the summer feeding program, to Tanya's point that she shared on the chat, is that's exactly why we targeted our summer feeding. Before we even had that, we had about 2,000 sites that folks go to apartment complexes. They ride on buses. I got to ride on buses last year to meet families and children, especially where they are. And they do so many good things with the kids. And so we just don't want to lose that connection and that resource that's available. So we are making the resources available. They are aimed at towards the families, like the audience for families, but they're accessible. They will be accessible for all school districts or any feeding sites that would like to take advantage of them. But I appreciate your point about that. I think that is loud and clear, and that's obviously what's being said as well on the chat. And to Mary Pat, she also said the libraries have sent a reopening plan to the governor's office, so they may have limited availability. We haven't received anything back yet, but I will keep you posted. Mary Pat, that would be wonderful because we know what a huge impact our community libraries have on our families. I knew it before, but experiencing it last summer by taking books and being guest readers at our libraries, they are full all day long with young and old and large families and small. And to your point, I appreciate that point. It looks like I agree with you, Kevin. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Did you see Eddie Campbell's question about will there be expanded summer feeding sites this year, considering the number of families impacted by layoffs and job loss?
It's a good question. I'm going to let Karen, not Karen, Robin Kinney answer that question since she's over food programs.
So Robin, the question to you was, are there going to be expanded summer feeding sites this year, considering the number of families impacted by the layoffs and job loss? And you're on mute, Robin. She may have stepped aside.
While she's coming on, and I think I can answer it partially. We know we already have an increase in summer in districts participating in summer feeding. I don't have the exact number, but several districts came online into summer feeding at the same time they were being approved as new NTI districts. And this all occurred the third week of March, or I guess the second and third weeks of March. So we already have an increased number of sponsors that are eligible to continue summer feeding. But many of them are new to the program. And so I guess it will be a point of, again, logistics and to the point that they feel like they have the staff and ability and bandwidth to do it over the summer. And I'm not sure if Robin has any early numbers of whether that's going to translate into an increase, since we do have an increase in number of approved providers, if we know ahead of time whether that will translate into an increased number of sites during the summer compared to last year. But we can get that for you for the task force.
And I will add, just for the 19 districts who signed on before the pandemic hit in to be a part of our Read Up program, we had to, in the last couple of weeks, we had to order 3 times as many books for each student to be able to get a book because of the participation rate increasing drastically. We didn't increase the number of sites since this was agreed upon in February, but the number of students was a significant jump. So to your point, Kevin, I think we're really picking up a lot of families maybe who've never even taken advantage of summer feeding before, that's a positive out of this. The other comment that Brian Lavelle made is talking about the barriers is the PPE and in-person testing and screening can pose as additional barriers. Connectivity can be an issue, but there are some true barriers just in the logistics of keeping everyone safe. Absolutely, we see a lot of that.
And then Dr. Pruitt
Yes,
has got a shout out there for the summer program.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Pruitt, for sharing that. Okay.
Sometimes it takes somebody sitting outside of the borders to give us a compliment. I think sometimes maybe we're a little too hard on ourselves inside the state. We do know on the summer feeding numbers that the numbers from during the COVID-19, the districts are serving more food, more meals than they have kids in the school, which is permitted under summer feeding. But just as an example of the demand that's out there, and then we've been seeing it since mid-March, and then that's likely to continue over the summer, of course, just due to the economic conditions.
Okay, we ready to move on to the next topic? I'll take that as a yes. So next on the agenda is reentry in the fall with, again, Amanda and Kelly, and we're going to add Greta Hilton and Kay Kennedy into the conversation. So Amanda?
All right, well, I'll kick it off, but certainly, as you all know, reentry is not just a one-shot deal. It's multifaceted. You probably have felt that, especially as you're starting to think through or helping agencies think through how to do this in the fall, what it may or may not look like. And so I'll just kind of kick us off, but I'll definitely refer to all my colleagues on this. So the area that we're focusing on clearly from the Office of Teaching and Learning is really about the academics piece. And what does that look like? We know that every student walking in is going to have their own struggles, whether they are gifted or whether they are students with disabilities, or they're your average kid that comes in that you say, well, they've never had a problem before. There's going to be different gaps for different reasons. And so we are really trying to prepare now to help teachers prepare now in districts as they start to think through the summer how they will approach in the fall. One of the things that we really want to avoid in the fall is folks to assume when there's been a lack of exposure to instruction to certain standards that there is a deficit, that they need intervention, when quite honestly that probably is not the case. There's going to have to be some real intentional direct instruction and core instruction that has to be solid every day in practices with really identifying what the students need. If you were not aware, last week we kicked off a series for how you can start planning. We were really pleased with the response rate we've had. We've have over 2,000 views in a week, but we had over 700 and the first day. We were so happy. And basically what we're doing, we just did a kickoff with a little bit of homework, and we're doing a series of how teachers can start to walk through the curriculum they were able to teach and the standards they taught, those that were taught during remote learning, and then those that were not covered, and start to look at the progressions on the standards to know how you can help the teachers for next year know where the students, what they received and what they didn't. How do you plan for that? working with the teachers in before the grade. If it's a K-8, clearly in high school, it would look a little bit differently. But we are addressing the needs around what students received when they had remote learning, and possible gaps and ways to address those. And so we kicked that off last week. Like I said, it was very positive. And this week, May 6th, is our next one. And so we're going to be identifying potential time savers in 2021 curriculum and potential gaps. So we're going to dive a little deeper. So teachers were asked to, and instructional leaders were asked to look and see what they've already done, kind of reflect back on what got accomplished, and start to work through what would come next. And so we have our webcast May 6th from 2 to 3. And then we have another webcast the following week. Now, the reason we're doing these so early, some are like, this is May, we're trying to close up. We know that June is probably going to be respite for many people due to fatigue. And we also know that in July, some people are going to ramp things up or maybe even sooner. So what we wanted to do is get this series moving, have the webcast archive ready for your use when you need it to meet your staff or to meet the district staff just in time, and provide that guidance. We got lots of great feedback from our co-ops and our districts saying that some have already started this work. They felt validated because this is the direction they were going, which we had no doubt at all, and we're just glad to be of assistance. So this is where we're starting to move into those steps of how to prepare, but that's just one step. Obviously, we have logistics, we have special populations and their needs, we have mental health, and so as you know, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues so you can hear about the other pieces as well. I guess, Kelly, it would be to you.
Thank you. One of the things that I want to follow up as well is on the guidance piece, and that's something that we're working on internally. So once again, I'll go back to questions that you're hearing from principals, teachers, superintendents, as well as concerns and barriers that they feel like they're going to be facing. If you could put those in the chat, we're going to try to address all of those in the guidance that we put together as an agency. And I think I will turn it over to Greta, who is going to talk a little bit about special populations.
Thanks, Kelly. And good afternoon. A couple of things that I just want to bring to your attention out of the Office of Special Education and Early Learning. Probably the biggest area that has people talking currently is just recently Secretary DeVos made recommendations to Congress to not allow waivers for FAPE or least restrictive environment. The only actual waiver or actually flexibility that she recommended was that would really pertain to us would be about the transition timeline from Part C to Part B programs, which is essentially having that IEP in place by a child's 3rd birthday. And while this was very much appreciated by the special education community, because obviously we don't want waivers of LRE or IDEA, we probably need a little more flexibility than that. We are going to wait to see what the decision is from Congress, but obviously if state education agencies aren't provided with any flexibility, that's going to be a burden for local districts as well. So in just thinking about that, and as we move forward and thinking about services missed or time lost or lack of progress for students with disabilities, I think one of the biggest areas that we need to think about in special education was really twofold. It's really about thinking around the compensatory education that will be owed to students for services lost, as well as contingency planning within IEPs for the future. So if, in thinking about if we come back to school and it looks very different or somewhat different or even a little bit different, then what are those contingency plans in those IEPs to ensure that students don't continue to miss services and that we're able to provide all the services that students are entitled to through the alternate forms of education, be it a hybrid model or whatever that looks like, full NTI, whatever the future holds. So that's an area to think about in special education. And then backing up also the compensatory education and the cost of compensatory education. And as we move forward with that, obviously, there's, as districts think about, ways in which to use some of the additional funding that Rob and Kinney spoke about, we also need to be mindful of individual maintenance of effort requirements for districts under the IDEA. So, and I know as you guys are thinking about these things and having conversations with districts, those are very important pieces, and we have staff in my office that can help work through that, because it could be a catch-22 if you use too much CARES funding and then offset the amount of local dollars, then you get yourself in a maintenance of effort situation, or vice versa. So we're happy to work through that with individual districts. And then also I want to mention the weekly webinars that my office has been doing in conjunction with the regional training centers for preschool, as well as the special education cooperatives. Those have gone extremely well. We have gotten a lot of positive feedback. The actual phase one, in other words, the phase one on what tools and resources do districts need to get through this time, that's scheduled to end next week, but we have future conversations for the future for phase two and what would reentry look like. So again, if you have ideas for that, please put those in the chat box or send those to me directly. We're also working on guidance around the differences between compensatory education and extended school year services. I've heard lots of comments around ESY versus Comp Ed, and there seems to be some misconception and misunderstanding, not only across the state, but across the nation, really, in the belief that ESY or, additional summer programs or things of that nature can remedy services lost for students with IEPs. And the standard for ESY is recoupment and retention of skills already taught, not of skills or instruction missed. So we're working on some guidance with that. And again, would love your ideas, thoughts, or what challenges districts have with that. And then from the preschool lens, we're working very closely with preschool folks and really all of early learning, because there's a forecast, obviously, that preschool numbers may increase significantly moving forward, because there's going to be a number of people who are now eligible for preschool that would not have been otherwise due to job losses and the increase in unemployment rate. So we're working through that. We realize there's going to be all kinds of challenges, but I'll bring this back to the guiding question, and thinking about those things for preschool and students with IEPs. We're happy to have all of your feedback either in the chat box or open for discussion, or to send to me individually. And I'll stop there and see what questions you may have.
And then I think we still have Kay to add into this conversation as well. Kay Kennedy, are you ready? You may be on mute, Kay.
Good afternoon. Now, how about that?
That sounds good.
Great. So representing the Office of Finance and Operations, of course, Robin Kinney talked a little bit about some of the financial challenges. From an operational standpoint, basically we are considering the areas of student transportation, student health, student feeding, and then from a facilities perspective, how do you address the requirements that may be around deep cleaning and continuous disinfecting of buildings as there is traffic in and out of that building. So again, we would be interested in your concern not only about how schools and districts will deal with the day-to-day operations, but very interested from a supply standpoint. If there are concerns or that folks have been thinking about the food supply, the supply of PPE, the supply of disinfectants and cleaning equipment to disinfect and sanitize the buildings. So that's an area of concern. We'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And then from the health perspective, we are concerned about vulnerable populations from both the staff and the student perspective. From the student perspective, again, there are vulnerable populations who are very susceptible to health issues. And even among the, quote, healthy population, students are required prior to school entry to have certain wellness checkups, dental checkups, and be on their vaccine schedule, their vaccination schedule. So there's some concern around the ability to get those done this summer and keep students on track for their shots. From a staffing perspective, we know that in a lot of the service areas, some of the workers are in that 65 and over category. Some of the workers are challenged with other health issues, and keeping the operational areas functional with the appropriate number of staff may or may not be a challenge. We'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that as well. Okay, back to you, Karen.
Kay, did you see the comment from Melissa Biggerstaff in there?
Yes, again, I think all of the concerns around how we may or may not have to change how the facilities operate in terms of, you know, entry to the building and hand washing stations and getting supplies, additional supplies for the hand washing stations. I mean, not only is it, are those things available, first of all, we're hearing that there are some shortages on being able to get, you know, things as simple as hand sanitizer, but hopefully we'll be able to address that better in a, you know, in a couple of months. But yes, those concerns are part of what the plan contains. And when I say plan, I really mean the sort of the framework at this point, or what are the things that we need to be thinking about, but you're spot on with that.
Okay, does anyone have anything else they want to share? Of course, you can continue to keep typing in the chat box, and we'll be capturing all of that as we go. And again, I'll also be having an exit slip with these guiding questions, so anything additional can be added into our exit slip. And as I bring up our next speaker, Dr. Damian Sweeney, I'll let him share his presentation with us. Damian, are you on?
Yes, good afternoon.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Damian, and while he shares his, I'm going to go ahead and share in the chat box the exit slip, and you can all, it'll be a link that you can all work on either at the end of the meeting or afterwards. You should be able to get to it afterwards. Damian, over to you.
Awesome. Can you just confirm audibly that you can see my screen?
Yep, I can see it.
Awesome. All right, great. So my name is Damian. I'm the program coordinator for comprehensive school counseling. We've been working on quite a bit that we're really proud of to offer different districts and schools during this time. One of those pieces is mental health and reentry. One of our colleagues at the department that's not joining us today, she's in the hospital, unfortunately, but that's Dr. Vanderhaar, and I just wanted to honor her. I'm also going to introduce Miriam Silman.
Hi, my name is Miriam Silman, and I am working in part-time basis with KDE. I'm actually located in the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities. But as part of my job, I'm the co-lead on Project Aware, which I was involved with previously through the Center on Trauma and Children. And the other half I spend at DBH-DID as the Trauma Informed Care Program Administrator over there, working with the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. So Damien and I have a history of working together, and I just wanted to say that the integration of behavioral health and SEL into all of this, I think, is a really important piece, and thank you for making space for that in these conversations.
All right. Okay, so we all have stress right now. That is no secret. Some of us hide it a little bit better than others, but many of us are experiencing anxiety about exposure and illness. So you may have a cough, and you may think to yourself, "Man, allergies are really tough right now," or it's just a cough, while somebody else might have a cough and they think that they've been infected. So there's a lot of anxiety for many of us about exposure to this illness right now. Also, there's stress around limited connections to others. I think it's absolutely normal to just wish that you could reach out and give somebody a high five or reach out and give somebody a hug. But that limited connection to others and a limited support system creates quite a bit of stress as well. A lack of cognitive stimulation or monotony. So especially as adults, anybody's really used to having multiple conversations throughout the day, whether that's in the school or outside of it. And those conversations just help keep our mind fresh, help us feel like we are cognitively stimulated. And with the lack of those conversations, we might feel that monotony happening right now. Limited access to normal coping strategies is another stressor. So if you love to go to the gym, you can't do that right now. Hopefully you're finding other routines to get your workouts in, but that limited access to normal coping strategies, if you play an instrument and get instruction from a teacher or coach, and you don't have access to that can really create some stress for you as well. Of course, we have different family members that might be stressed by the pandemic or many other things, and that can trigger us as well. Certainly, there are limited resources for folks, and financial stress is hard, losses and grief, and then just uncertainty. We don't know right now when we're going to be able to get back into schools, when we're going to be able to pick up our routines again, and that uncertainty also causes stress. When we specifically think about students, students can show signs of stress by clinging to us. And when we think about students clinging to us, you might be thinking, well, we're just talking about the young ones, elementary school kids. But we used to offer a counseling corner during lunch at the cafeteria. Our school counselors did, and we would have kids sit with us every single day because they just needed that support. They just needed to know that we were there. So you might see that elementary, middle, or high. The whiny, the tearful, the frightened, and anxious are also going to be signs that you're going to see with students. Kids are going to be agitated, hyperactive, and overreactive at times, irritable, impatient, aggressive, and angry. Students may be withdrawn or disengaged, lethargic, depressed, sad, hopeless, and suicidal. With these symptoms, certainly we want you to take a closer look at that, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a while. Students may not be able to concentrate. They may have limited comprehension and a poor memory, and they may also complain of just different physical issues, right? My stomach hurts, I've got a headache. We already are seeing many students that are having sleep disturbance, right? They're really struggling with sleep. They're worried about themselves being infected or somebody in their family. And then appetite disturbance can also be an issue for kids. And then attention-seeking behavior, where kids will actually get in your face, could be another sign of stress for kids. We also have to think about our staff. Our staff is struggling, right? So it's our staff right now is they're not sure when they're going to be reunited with their colleagues, with their kiddos. So they're feeling anxious and fearful, also experiencing depression and sadness, right? When they can't celebrate at the end of the year like we do, right? Where the entire staff is out in the lobby and cheering the kids on for making it another year. And that's really that opportunity to celebrate and unite over the fact that we did this, and that can cause some depression or sadness. Staff may also experience feelings of being withdrawn or less engaged and absent. That can particularly be the case with virtual learning and virtual teaching. They can also be irritable, impatient, frustrated, angry, explosive, and overreactive. They can be agitated, have poor concentration or poor memory as well. Again, you may hear staff complaining of physical issues. They may be overwhelmed, confused, have difficulty with problem solving or making decisions. And then another big one is that they may experience loss of creativity or a lack of motivation. So there are also triggers that may create a risk for increased stress response. So if somebody's recently experienced loss or they have a history of significant loss, that could be this whole experience of the pandemic can be a real big trigger for them. If students if anybody, whether it's a student or adult, has experience with past trauma or current exposure to trauma, that can certainly be a risk for increased stress response. School counselors throughout the state, any mental health professional throughout the state, and many of you are extremely concerned because we know that kids that experience trauma, they're really suffering right now. And I was recently on a call, and although our community service agencies aren't getting as many calls as normal, the calls are down about 50%. We know that trauma is still happening in homes. So that's why it's going to be really important for you to check in with kids, make sure that you start with your tier 3 kids and then work down to tier 2 and tier 1. Another risk for increased stress response is pre-existing behavioral health concerns or different histories of multiple concerns in terms of behavioral health, limited support systems in family, community, and workplace. So with that, we just really mean unloving homes, right? When we know that kids are in unloving homes, maybe there hasn't been a history of trauma, but they're just not shown that love and support that we'd like them to be shown and we'd like them to experience. That's also another risk. Feelings of isolation, difficulty with attachment and relationships, and then poor coping skills and supports. Those can also be risks for increased stress responses. So what can schools do? We need to be thinking about awareness, right? Providing awareness that we understand that different people are experiencing multiple stressors, building resilience. Miriam spoke earlier about social and emotional learning. We can build resilience certainly through SEL. I think that all content lessons when we get back and when we're talking about students reentering should start with social and emotional learning. And then we can certainly plan for crises. So we need to again be aware. So we need to look, listen, and link. When we see concerning behaviors or we hear concerning behaviors, we need to link kids and maybe even staff to our mental health professionals in our schools and in our districts, and then maybe even our community agencies. So again, look is going to be the practical needs and the psychosocial needs and academic professional needs. Listen is going to be listening to our students and families, our staff and our communities, and then linking them once again to our internal resources, whether that be in the school or the district or in the community. I'm going to let Miriam talk a little bit about resilience.
And as I get started, I just want to point out that all three of these ABCs, awareness, building resilience, and thinking about a plan for crisis, is happening both with regard to your staff and your students. So it really is a parallel process that all of the things that we think about in terms of outreach and paying attention for students, we should also be doing for staff right now. And we know that the relationship between students and staff in a building is very much like the relationship between children and their parents. And students take their cues from the adults in the building. So the more resilient the adults can be, then the more resilient we can help the students to become. And so they really do go hand in hand. When we think about building resilience for both staff and students, we think about these 6 areas, I guess it's 7 areas, so 6 areas of connection, safety, taking care of the body, building competence, a sense of empowerment, and teaching kids and staff ways to manage their own emotions and self-regulate in that way. Next slide, please. So when we think about connection, we were thinking about this in a proactive way, especially at this time when we're in a social distancing situation. And I've heard tons of stories about how schools and districts are doing that really well, and even in what you all said earlier about ways to reach out to families. But I think that that is something that really needs to be sustained. And so it's not just reaching out once or twice, especially for kids who may have experienced trauma or families who may have experienced trauma. They need that constant contact. And sometimes they may not respond the first time you reach out, but it may be the 3rd or 4th time that you actually can learn something that would be helpful or a need that they have. As we think about reentry or maybe even some summer programming, think about how we can create mentoring situations and maybe some buddies. And again, that could happen at the staff level as well as at the student level. And the nice thing about that is there may be ways to do that virtually. We also know about programs like check-in, check-out that we know are helpful to kids, and maybe a really important thing to build in as you're thinking about re-entry to support mental health, especially for kids who you know may have been at higher risk during this time. When we think about safety, we're thinking about both physical and psychological safety. And part of psychological safety is helping kids to and staff to be able to share what's going on. And the first step in that is to normalize that there has been stress and that it's likely that everybody is feeling that stress. And sometimes we take that for granted, but it really needs to be explicitly said to both our staff and our students. There are a lot of resources at the Cabinet for Health and Family Services and the state COVID-19 site around stress from COVID-19 and the stress of social distancing. And I would encourage you to share those with your staff and help them to feel like that's a normal response and to normalize it for themselves and one another as well as for the families. We also, again, are going to go back to that kind of psychological first aid of looking and listening so that we can link and meet needs. And don't forget that sometimes in order to listen, we have to ask a question first. So we do have to open the door and say, how are you doing? Because especially kids who have experienced trauma very often say that the reason that they don't share what's going on is they didn't think anybody either cared or wanted to know. And it's a very literal read on that. So to ask those questions of how kids are doing. The other thing around safety is for the adults in the space to be modeling good emotional expressions and teaching kids how to share what's going on, and that is the first step in helping them to regulate it more. So if we're going to get to a place of regulation, we also have to teach them how to share what's going on. Certainly working with other parts of your systems to ensure good nutrition and exercise is already happening, and I think that fits very well into the educate, feed, and support model that you have, and that will obviously need to continue. You may notice when you get back to school in the fall, or hopefully in the fall, whenever that is, that things like recess and movement breaks are going to be really, really important. And it may be something that you want to coach staff to do even in virtual learning situations. So I was just thinking that actually before we got started, we probably should have given everybody a minute to stretch, because this is a long time to sit and pay attention. I'm thinking about how to do that. Next slide, Damien. And then the last three for, nope, sorry, one before that. There we go. For building competence, we really want to think about how to convey a sense of affirmation for kids and for our staff, because everybody's feeling this sense of not having a lot of control about what's going on. And one of the ways that we realize that we've been effective is when somebody praises us. So that targeted affirmation is really important. You may find that because all of our brains have been more in survival mode and stress mode, that our frontal lobes and prefrontal cortexes are not functioning as well. Our executive functioning is not firing as rapidly as normal. So we may need to break things down into smaller chunks than you normally would. And that may be true both for your students and your staff. And there may need to be a lot of repetition and patience. I think people have probably found that in virtual learning and virtual meetings, but that may be true even when you get back to face, because it may take a while for the executive functioning part of the brain and cognition to come back online. And there may be significant ongoing stressors that are keeping kids in particular keeping their brains in stress mode. Another part of building resilience is to give people a sense of empowerment, and the best ways to do that are by offering choices as much as possible, by giving them a voice and a chance for input, and to have a lot of flexibility so that if one way of doing things doesn't work, there is an alternative and another way that can be suggested to support them. That can help to minimize dysregulation from frustration and distress. And then that last area of building resilience is to really promote self-regulation. And I know a lot of schools have been doing that through SEL and emotional literacy and mindfulness activities. Those things are going to need to become really a routine part of how we do business. And when we think about social and emotional support, we want to not only think about particular lessons and content areas, but the way that we're relating to kids and to staff, frankly, every day, and how we convey what we need from them and ask them to do in ways that are supportive. We do know that short bursts of mindful focusing activities can be very helpful for both emotional regulation as well as cognitive functioning. So that will give you a double bang for your buck in terms of helping academics as well as behavioral regulation. And then, as I said, taking regular breaks. Next slide. So this last thing that we want to mention in terms of that ABC is a crisis plan, and we know that you have been thinking about that, and many of you are probably well on your way. A few things to think about when you're thinking about integrating mental health into your crisis plan. First of all, to make sure that your crisis team has representation from all components of your school community, and I would encourage you to make sure that you have folks who are driving buses and food services and those kinds of folks, as well as your social service people and your frisks, because they really will be able to point out things that are important and may have a connection to some of the mental health and social service needs of your families. As you're creating this crisis plan, to really think about the social and emotional learning piece and the social and emotional way of being, so that you can maximize flexibility. Also to always build into that crisis plan an opportunity for ongoing monitoring and real-time response, even in the midst of doing something. So probably many of you are familiar with PDSA cycles or some kind of problem-solving process like that, which really is an important piece to build into that from the mental health perspective, because you may run up against something that you weren't anticipating and need to pivot in real time in that way. As part of paying attention to planning, please always pay attention to culture and climate issues and how are kids going to feel coming back in. I think you've all rightly thought already about the anxieties that kids, staff, and parents may have about entering a place where we are not socially distancing anymore, and how to reassure them in that way, and other elements of creating psychological safety. We always want to reopen in an optimistic way, so really be thinking about ways to promote those feelings of renewal and hope, and not assume that everybody comes back with that. And then lastly, but not not at all the least, is that everybody is going to have experienced some level of grief and loss. And for some people, it may be profound because they may be losing family members or friends, and your school communities may be losing members of the community. And so we have to really be prepared to address that. That will become its own trauma for some members of the school community. And I want to just remind you that you have some state level resources in the Kentucky Community Crisis Response Board. You also have your behavioral health partners, and schools can really partner with behavioral health partners now and in the fall to support schools that have experienced some losses in the school community, but also to not minimize some of the losses that may not be death-related losses, but just loss of milestones, loss of connection, and loss of, kind of these phases of development, especially for some of our adolescents for whom this is really, the social distancing has really created a situation where they can't actually achieve what is the normal developmental phase that they need to do at this point. So if any of you have adolescents at home, I'm sure you're feeling that. And the reason to think about all of these things is because as much as you're thinking about academics and gaps and needs assessment and those things, that until kids are going to be ready to learn, they can't even start to fill in those gaps. And so we want to make sure that kids are ready to learn and that our teachers are ready to teach in that way. Next slide.
Real quick,
Please.
Miriam,
Yeah.
I did want to mention that we have linked a virtual crisis plan. So should there be, if there were to be a loss in your school or in your school community, then we do have a way for you to address that virtually. So that guidance document is linked here.
Thank you. And then just to think about the piece around compassion, and when we talk about compassion, we really also want to make sure that we're helping our teachers to have some self-compassion at this time. That's a really important part of them building resilience, and so that compassion, grace, and generosity for ourselves, as well as what we extend to one another, but also to remember that there's always a reason behind what's happening with a student and what we see, and to kind of look beneath the surface, below the iceberg, so to speak, to pay attention to that, because that can usually help us get to a solution that will then enhance their academic performance as well as their school behavior and their functioning in general. But I think that we, again, sometimes take that for granted. And especially I've been spending a lot of time with staff in a lot of different facilities during this time, and needing to support one another, but also to really promote that feeling of self-compassion is really critical to be ready to do the work. And for kids who have experienced trauma and to have a trauma-sensitive or trauma-responsive environment, we always think about asking the question, what's happened, rather than what's wrong. And in addition to asking what's happened, to focus on what's strong, with both our students and our staff. So to really build on the strengths, and that's a significant way of building resilience and knowing what they need. As part of this, I also just want to stress, I heard some things earlier that focused on a number of different populations who may have some particular needs. And I did want to put a plug in for your behavioral health partners to please really pay attention to what they can offer. And just to make sure everybody knows that telehealth is available, and it's been broadened greatly, and there's really no reason why providers in your communities cannot be offering telehealth. So as you identify needs in students, families, or staff, to please go ahead and make those referrals and help get them connected, because telehealth can happen from the get-go, and there's all kinds of ways it can happen. I also want to remind you that for emergencies, face-to-face assessments and services are still available through behavioral health providers. So it doesn't mean that that's the only option. Okay, next slide. Okay, I thought that was it. So looking for any anything in the chat box and any questions or responses. If there are particular questions around trauma, I know that was one of the guiding questions and maybe we didn't focus on that as much. The ABC is as important for kids who have experienced trauma this time. Domestic violence shelters are open and functioning. I'm hoping, Rhonda said that maybe there's a silver lining that will focus more on mental health and behavioral health, and I'm hoping that that could be a silver lining in that. So in terms of sharing this information, Damien, you want to take that?
Sure. So Miriam and I will be presenting over the next few days to different advisory groups, advisory councils, but we can certainly, we actually have talked about using this quick presentation as just a foundation to a larger one, so we can potentially record this and offer it to different districts.
And again, a lot of resources are available through both the KDE website and the Cabinet for Health and Family Services website. And I would say that if you are looking for specific information, if teachers are concerned about how to talk to kids about things, you could take anything that's geared for parents and adapt that for teachers. So some of the resources that are there for parents are a good guide. Actually, Damien, you know what? I also have one thing for teachers that I didn't even think about. I'll send, and we can send that out. All
right, and you guys know I have to do it, so I'm gonna put the comprehensive school counseling link for COVID. We've created some really cool resources that I think a lot of educators, whether you're a counselor or not, can benefit from. So I'll put that link in there. I have to do it. So you can check that out and then contact me with any further questions. Thank you for your time today. Back to you, Karen.
Thank you both, Damien and Miriam. Okay, so we're capturing those comments here in the chat, and also I did put the link up above to the exit slip. So that's another opportunity to respond to all of the guiding questions that were asked today, as well as to give us some input on topics you think the task force still needs to address moving forward. And I believe that's all we have on our agenda. So Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you for any final comments.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to all the presenters. Very good information today. As Karen said, we do take down all of the information you put in the chat, and then we're also starting a new process of the exit slip. It's designed to be for you to quickly fill out, but also get information to us that you may not have had time, or maybe you thought about it after the meeting, after you signed off. And we started using that with our student advisory council and got we actually got as much feedback from the exit slip as we got from the actual meeting. So we're going to try to start using a similar process in all of our advisories. So please take a few minutes to do the exit slip. If anybody now wants to volunteer some future topics, of course, we will be revolving around the COVID-19 issues and getting you more information about school reopening. One of the things we're working on, as I mentioned early on at the beginning, is getting guidance to districts to make sure that the various types of reopening scenarios are on their radar screens. We're starting out by using some models from Georgia. The Georgia Commissioner of Education lists 5 scenarios, one being traditional, one being adjusted, one being, so they're named traditional, adjusted, partial, postponed, and intermittent closure. And so we'll be getting some information like that to school districts, even though some of those options may be very unlikely to occur. We want to make sure districts are thinking about what that looks like. And then, of course, you layer on top of all of those the information we talked about today, the building reopening, the actual logistics that takes that, whether or not deep cleaning has to occur every day, in addition to the normal cleaning that occurs in our school buildings. Does it have to be more advanced? All those things that were talked about in earlier on the task force meeting will be layered in on that. So we'll want you to weigh in on that as we move forward. Again, we want districts to be thinking about what that looks like, because they're going to have to be very nimble if the virus continues to progress as it has been predicted that it will. So feel free to let us know for future topics. We will plan another meeting 2 weeks from today. And Karen, do you have any other closing comments? Anything we need to address?
Nope, we're good.
All right. I want to thank all the partners for what all you're doing. You're doing great work, and I've been very proud of the state and how we've responded. And I don't want it to be lost on anyone that we, as everyone, and you've heard me say in other venues, we are in Kentucky, we're using NTI to get to the minimum school term. The only exception to that is we're allowing NTI to count for 7 hours, which gives districts just a little bit of a edge in shaving just a day or two off most calendars. And that's not happening in all the states. And Wall Street Journal, as you've heard me say, did a report, an article a week ago that talked about how some states and districts are just calling it quits, saying remote learning is too tough, and it is tough. But I've been proud that Kentucky has, and this is everybody, this is administrators, teachers, parents, kids, everybody's responded. That doesn't mean that we're not tired, and NTI is not perfect, and it's a platform not designed to use in this way, but we are using it in this way. So I'm really pleased with how things are going, despite the frustration and the exhaustion. So I think all organizations need to pat themselves on the back a little bit, because it's taken all of us to get this done. So thank you all for your assistance in this, and as we continue to work over the close of the school and over the summer to get ready for next year. Everybody have a good rest of the day. We'll give you about 24 minutes back to your day, and we'll sign off. And we'll
Thanks,
see you
everyone.
online. Thank you.